from the Fiction Fairy, and today I'm bringing you a book review. And my book review is on Sanctum by Madeleine Roux. Now, I received this book from HarperCollins, and this book comes out in September. And this book was just really, really good. The first book to this is called Asylum, and Asylum was so scary for me. Like, I couldn't even read it at night. And Sanctum was pretty much the same way. It was super creepy, and it was just a fantastic book. Now, this book does follow the same three main characters, and I don't want to really spoil too much because this is a secondary book, and I'm not sure if this is going to be a duology or if this is going to be a trilogy, but the same three main characters are followed during this book, and they end up going back to the same university that they had been at the previous summer, where they had stayed in a dormitory that was an old asylum. So they head back there, and it's a continuation of their story, except for this time the creepiness lies within a vintage carnival. So the school hosts a carnival that kind of is part of the school's legacy and history, and it's a vintage type carnival. It has like the old guys on the tall stilts, the weird creepy clowns. It has, you know, the man putting knives down his throat. It has the fortune tellers. It has, you know, the guys with the long mustaches. It has all that like old school carnival aspects to it, which to me I find incredibly creepy. I don't like it. I don't like all the makeup that clowns wear. I don't like carnivals in general. I don't like carnivals because carnivals are meant to be fun, because it transforms everything you know into something different, and I don't like that. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't want to be around it. Shenanigans to me always goes down, and when you read this book you realize maybe you don't like carnivals either, because shenanigans start to go down. There's so much they find out when they're there. I mean, the mystery just, the plot begins to thicken, you know what I mean? And it's fun because although it follows the same three characters from the previous book, it's a different storyline. Like, you would think that, because for me Asylum ended, and I didn't really necessarily think it needed to have another book. It could be a perfectly good standalone on its own. So when Sanctum was getting ready to be released, when it was being talked about, I was kind of like, I wonder how they're going to keep the story going, because it kind of ended like it could be its own standalone and it wrapped up and there you go. And then when you read Sanctum, you realize that it's not a continuation necessarily of that same storyline. It's a continuation of the story with the three characters. I'm not sure if that's making any sense, but it's kind of like if you were going to the Acme grocery store right now with your friend. You're like, yeah, and you're telling that story, and then the next day you're going to have another story, and they're like, well, how are they going to continue on the story of them going to Acme when it wrapped up so nicely? It's not a story about you guys going back to the Acme grocery store again. It's now a story of you two going somewhere else. So it's not a continuation of the same story. It's a continuation of the story of the three characters. And I really like that, and I really could appreciate it. I guess it would be kind of more like it felt more like a companion novel, but I know in companion novels it usually follows characters from the previous story, but not the main characters from the previous story. And this is what this kind of felt like, except for you're following the same three characters. So needless to say, now that I've totally confused that whole little part for you, it's a continuation of the story of the characters, not a continuation of the actual story. And once I kind of wrapped my head around that a little bit, it got so good. It was just like, oh my god, these guys are back in it. They're like holy macarellis. They are like back in the thick of things. Things are happening. It was kind of more fun because when they were there last summer, it was kind of like, it was a little dull. It was a little like, you know, they were there just to kind of explore the college, see what their options were for school, and basically do like a weekend overnight. This one was more like you had like the college parties going. It felt more like a realistic book. What would really happen on a college overnight, or a college overnight for the weekend when you go to explore college, and you know, you have the people there to show you around, and the people you're going to roommate with for the weekend. And so they had like the real college aspect of it, and then you had all these mysteries. And it was so much fun because they had all these new people that were being introduced that you were kind of like, oh, totally, it's that person's cray-cray. It totally is that person. No, totally not. Oh, that person's cray-cray. I know that they play an important role in the story. Never heard from them again. Never. And then you're like, oh yeah, that person, psh, Why they even put that person in the story? They didn't need anything. Oh yeah, you might want to watch out for that person. It was just like, it was just so much mystery that ensued. And the characters had really grown up from the first book. And I loved them just as much as I did before. I thought that they were funny. I thought that the mystery with them was really fantastic. I thought that even though they were kids or teenagers, getting ready to go into college, they felt much more grown up than that. And I just really, really loved this book again. Oh my gosh. And like I said, the carnival was just incredibly creepy. It was just such a good book. Now, this book does tie into Asylum towards the end. Because there's a couple pieces from Asylum that start to tie in towards the end. And it was woven so nicely. It made the books just conclude together. And that's why I kind of feel like this is probably a duology, because it just concluded it so nicely. It tied both books up. All my questions that I had were answered. I was just like, okay, cool. This is just, everything was tied up. To me, wasn't anything left hanging open. But the mystery was just like, whoa, wow, really? Like, I didn't expect that to happen. Nowhere in my mind did I think that was going to happen like that. So it was just such a good book. So when this book comes out, you definitely have to get it and pick it up and read it. And if you have not read Asylum, pick that book up and read it, because that book terrified me. Like, I could not read that book in the middle of the night. Like, I stayed up because I was terrified of that book. Like, that book had more, like, ghosts in it. And that freaking terrifies me, because I always think that a ghost is going to come and just abduct me in the middle of the night. I mean, it was so creepy. And this book was more, like I said, those creepy ass carnivals. Like, wow, they're creepy. Why do people go to carnivals? They're so creepy. Like, that is just a breeding ground for murders to happen. I mean, you can't tell who's who. You're going through mirrors that are making you look all distorted. I mean, it just is a breeding ground for just stuff to go down, and that's what happens in this. So this is just extra creepy. It was just so creepy. The town was creepy, the school was creepy, the carnival was creepy, the kids were creepy, everything was creepy. It was just a creepy bit creepster book. I just loved it. So yeah, I totally wish this had been coming out in like November, because I would have read it around Halloween time, but it's coming out a bit earlier than that. So like I said, guys, if you haven't read Asylum, read it. If you want to pick up Sanctum, it is coming out in September, and I definitely would recommend that you go ahead and pick up this book. I gave this book a 4 out of 5 cupcakes. If you're wondering, you like the book so much, how come you didn't give it a 5 out of 5? The reason why I didn't give it a 5 out of 5 was because there were some portions that were a bit slow, and like I said, it didn't follow the same exact storyline as the first book. It just followed like the same 3 characters, and then started to weave in a bit of the first storyline towards the end. And I kind of thought, when I first picked up the book, I thought it was going to be a direct continuation of the first storyline. So the beginning of it kind of confused me a little bit, and took me a minute to kind of figure out what was going on, that it was a continuation of the character stories, not necessarily a continuation of the exact storyline from the first book. So to me, there was a little bit of kind of a learning curve when I went into reading this book, and that is why I couldn't give it a higher rating. But 4 out of 5 cupcakes is still good. It's still a great read, and I still would recommend it. So thanks so much, guys, for coming past the Fiction Fairy and watching my review of Sanctum by Madeleine Roux.